Welcome back, my friends, to the sweet spot where IT leaders share their insights with other leaders, others that want to lead. My name is Carlos Vargas, and as every week, I have my two co-hosts, Howard Holton and Paul Lewis. Hey, guys.
Hey there.
I see Howard is getting knowledge. What are
Always getting knowledge. At least trying to.
Paul, you're still festive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Still fall. It's very important to me to maintain the assumption that there's leaves on the trees, even though there are no more leaves on the trees where I am. It's dreary and white at my house, and that needs to change.
Yeah. And rainy and stormy here.
Ugh. But at least you're south, so you get to see some sun at some time.
Yeah. What's your temperature right now, Paul?
I don't know. I'm guessing 2 to 3 degrees Celsius.
Ooh, you're warm.
Yeah.
I'm negative 12 degrees Celsius.
Yikes.
Negative 12.
10 degrees Fahrenheit, so negative 12 degrees Celsius.
There you go. So more snow is coming then?
Probably not, actually. We just get cold.
Mm.
We're way up in the mountains, and the wind comes whipping over the plains, so it tends to affect the temperature negatively.
Do you get the Chinook?
We do get some Chinook, yes.
Nice. Calgary is a positive Chinook city. It's either minus 30 or like positive 15 in the winter.
Yeah. We get either lovely or terrible. Like you don't go outside for more than seconds, or go outside all you want in your shorts.
Right.
It's weird.
It could swing from day to day. It's hilarious.
Or hour to hour.
Hour to hour.
Yeah, we definitely live in a must keep nice jacket in the car state.
Right.
Because it could very well go from short sleeve weather to you're freezing. You better grab a parka.
Right, parka and gloves.
Yeah.
But not Carlos. He gets sun and sea on a daily basis.
Yeah. Sunny weather every part of the year, but then it's rainy. That's a problem. You want to go out? Like here, you need an umbrella or a poncho or something on your car. Because you're out and you think that is perfect and you're in flip-flops, and then all of a sudden there's a hurricane.
All of a sudden there's a hurricane. I'm pretty sure there's some warning.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we need to work on a warning system. I mean, really. So what's the humidity like in Miami? Is it humid?
Yes, but depend on the area. There's some areas more on the south. If you're closer towards the beach, it is more humid than if you're more on the center. But thank God where we are, it's not that humid. It's not that bad. So we enjoy it. We like it. It's very similar to Puerto Rico. So
that's interesting. In California, the closer you are to the beach, the less humid it is, because you get the breeze all the time. Right. The breeze seems to pull the humidity out of the air.
Interesting. So it's very diverse where we are.
Here we go.
Different weather, another one. How about on the leadership bench? Diversifying the leadership bench. What do you guys think about that?
It's quite the stretch on the transition.
I think it might be nice. I always like to see the mental acrobatics that Carlos goes through there to try to connect our bullshit in the beginning to the actual topic. Like
Let me pick a random word.
Does it sometimes take you an hour to kind of unpretzel your brain after you do that? Because that one was pretty far.
Howard, you have thoughts on diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, so give me the statement that you made before.
There has been talk about diversification at the leadership level. So in our sense, it's the CIO and CTO and CISO, or all the VPs and SVPs of that team. How do you handle that? Do you handle that via org chart? Do you handle that via org design? Do you handle that via talent development? Do you handle that via recruiting? Could be any one of those things. I'm kindest on the side of org design, and I can talk about that. But what's your gut feeling in terms of diversification and inclusion?
I mean, So I think there's a couple of problems there. I think the biggest problem that we have is a lack of perspective. I think it's the biggest problem that most companies have is a lack of perspective. Especially when you look at the boards and the C level, right? They tend to fit a particular monochromatic scale. And unfortunately, what that does is it leaves you in the position where you're going to do the same thing you did yesterday tomorrow, right? And so we really need to start looking at diversification as the value added from differing perspectives, not the value added by the act of diversification. And therefore, if I'm looking for different perspectives, I really need to think about it almost backwards. What is it about the company that I'd like it to become? And then what are the perspectives that will help me get to what I want us to become? And then you've got a real clear path on what is the diversity in perspective that I'm looking for and how do I get that diversity in perspective? Rather than just, it seems entirely too much. We celebrate diversity for the fact that it is prima facie diversity, right? It's obvious on its face that it's diverse without ever talking about why that perspective is useful, interesting, innovative, and helpful to the organization itself.
So I'd argue with your response actually agrees from my perspective. So let me describe it. So one could tackle this problem exactly as you say from a people-centric perspective. I have a set of diversification stats to which I need to acquire, and therefore I'm going to either promote and or recruit in that manner. Or you can think of it as a diversification of opinion and inclusion, a consistent inclusion of that opinion, which means it's an organization pattern. Let me describe what I mean. So one can design the CIO and down organization to be equivalent to your own opinion, right? So of my opinion, I've been in CIO for 20 years. I'm a command and control CIO. I spend all my time reducing my expenses and ensuring that my blinking lights are on and my red, green, yellow projects. And therefore, everybody I hire will have that background, will have that perspective, will want to be measured that way. Or you can be a CIO who says, you know what, I already have X knowledge. What I don't have is A, B, C, D, all the way to Z knowledge. And therefore, I need to create a team that has a diversification of thought and therefore needs to come from a variety of backgrounds and ages and geographies and political spectrum to support that. And instead of having one-on-one conversations, I need to have a set of inclusionary conversations. I need to have one-on-one. I have to have small groups, and I have to have larger groups, and I have to assume that that's a continual educational pattern, not just to me, but to the rest of the team. So I see that in many ways as an organizational design pattern problem versus a recruiting and promotion problem. Does
Um,
that?
I tend to agree. Only I would describe it as agility of thought versus an echo chamber.
Mm.
If all we're designing is an echo chamber, we're never going to have diversity of thought. We're never going to have diversity of perspectives. And then all we're going to be able to do is get the result of A equals A. There's never a plus to an echo chamber. There's no
Right.
growth contained within an echo chamber, right? So if you're designing an echo chamber, if you look around and find that you've kind of organically designed an echo chamber, maybe it's time to stop and go, what do I want the end of the equation to be?
Right.
Then I can insert the value required to get the end of the equation. And it can't just be A plus A equals A. I mean, it can. Sure, you can do whatever you want. The fact is, you're not going to be successful if A plus A equals A. You're not going to attain the continuing success you could otherwise attain. If you know your goal is to grow a dollar into a dollar 10, great. If your goal is to grow a dollar into $10, it's not going to happen if it's an echo chamber. And I
So I
think that's
assume you've worked in both, right? You've worked in um, a less diverse environment and a more diverse environment, and what were the pros and cons of either?
so. The pro of a less diverse environment, especially in the startup space, is the ability to maintain a clear focus on a very tight objective. And if your goal is to have a very, very tight objective, a clearly defined target, and you've defined the path that you're going to use to get there, all of that is set, and it's really just about running as fast as you can to that target. An echo chamber does, in fact, have some value there. We're not going to get distracted if it's an echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, if you have any interest whatsoever in breaking out of the pattern that you see in front of you, of capturing a new market, of doing anything different whatsoever, it requires diversity of thought, diversity of perspectives. And the reality is that's more than just diversity of people. That's really a culture that inspires the confidence to execute on the value of that diversity, right? That
Mm-hmm.
means the person with the Harvard MBA and the person with the Hard Knocks MBA carry a similar voice in the room and similar consideration in the room. It doesn't mean we decide everything by having too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Right? It doesn't mean that everything is a party decision, but it does mean everyone gets heard, and you're able to go down the rabbit hole and go, hey, I think that actually has some merit regardless of the source. Let's kind of walk through that and think through that. And what
Mm-hmm.
happens entirely too often is it's diversity in name only, in
Right.
which case they really want you to be seen and never heard.
Right.
um, and and then we just march to the beat of the same drum with different drummers, and it really doesn't provide any of the value that we otherwise really should be seeking out.
Mm-hmm. Let me share a story where diversification actually, or diversity, was the solution. So back in my early days in the Canadian technology world, specifically in the mortgage world, there are three technologies. There was two PC client server technologies and one Mac-based client server technology, and they had existed for, let's say, 15 years. And they served up the mortgage broker community in Canada. Let's say there were 5,000 of these mortgage brokers, and it would be fair to say that there was an archetype of a mortgage broker, right? A male of a certain age who were delivering on individual financial advice to a variety of customers out in the world. We need to replace that technology over time. As you can imagine, there's only so much you could create without a web-based tool. So we decided to consolidate those three technologies into a single web-based technology. And knowing that the diversity of the ultimate home buyer was changing in terms of first-time home buyers, in terms of uh, be both an urban and rural, and seeing brokers. Unfortunately, we were designing the web-based application to be almost functionally equivalent to the server-based applications. And until we diversified the team to include much younger org members, both technologists and business analysts, and a diversity in terms of gender, in terms of not just age, but technological background, or even geo-centric background, to support understanding how our users would start to use this technology, which was different than before, how documents would get produced that would end up going to home buyers that were even more diverse than they were behind. So we essentially had to replace easily 80% of the team members and triple it just to ensure we had a different perspective of the user behavior, the user experience, the UI in general. And that was the only way we were effective. And we were able to consolidate those three applications. But diversification, diversity was the only way we were going to make this work going forward.
Sure. I mean, you can look at any engineering organization too and see a similar story repeated ad infinitum, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can almost now look at an interface and go, oh, that was built by the same engineers that built the tool to begin with.
Right.
Versus we went out and got people to represent the end user who built a user interface based on how they might want to actually interact with the thing, that showed clear and concise paths to get to what you want to get to, clear and concise results, and less than 4 clicks to find everything that you needed to find, and a nice shiny interface that made you want to use it. And the payout is enormously different, right? Look at Pure versus pick a vendor. People buy Pure because it's easy. They don't buy pure because it's got the name. And the value of easy really comes through in that diversification. I don't want the same thought process that led to the engineering of the box to design the user interface.
Right.
And that's actually very
Carlos,
important because it's not only with hardware, but I get a lot of offers for new software pieces, and you just described something that is very interesting. You can see when the team thinks and there's diversity of thought because the product becomes easy to use. There was one to send SMS text, and they was a great option, great price, but extremely clunky. But
Mhm.
when that one came out, I invested on it because it granted me the option that for the rest for life, I'll be able to send SMS about I think 10,000 or 25,000 SMS messages per month for anything. So I said, okay, so the value that what they were charging at that time, but the interface was horrible. So that's something that is very important as you describing that the engineering part need to include different areas. And you describing something that I wanted to ask you for not only the leaders but also the people that work with the leaders. You mentioned about diversity, so it will not be an echo chamber.
Mhm.
So how does a team support the leader so he doesn't become an echo chamber? How does
That's an
a
interesting perspective. So from
exactly support
member to leader versus leader to member.
exactly
Howard,
because if a CIO or a CTO or a manager is at a meeting, you don't want to just say yeah because you
mhm.
become zombies.
I mean, you make sure that you're heard, right? That's the best way to do it. And frankly, that's good career advice in general. Make sure that you're heard in the most respectful, most appropriate way possible. Those two things are important. Um, if a decision has already been made, being heard is not helpful, right? At that point, it's about how do I support that decision moving forward and how do I help execute on that decision, right? But when we're in the decision making process, now is the time to be heard. I understand what you're trying to say, but I think this perspective, I think this buyer, I think this, whatever it happens to be, is ultimately going to give us a better result. And this is what we need to do to accomplish that. And I think lacking that, I think we've got a problem, right? Lacking that, I think you're going to end up in a situation where it's either yes men or um, you become known as the problem employee that's always the naysayer.
Was
Neither
there an
of which is
obvious transition for you, Howard, between uh, a more diverse and a less diverse team, either a pure member team or a team to which reported into? Was there an
uh,
obvious point in time in your career, or
there was same company. I won't mention the company. It's a and so, both good and bad, right? There were team members that were hired to check a diversity box. Um, those that fit more than one checkbox often could do anything they wanted. Didn't matter. Their value was in checking the box. They knew it, and it was problematic. The company overinvested in them and got nothing out. At the same time, especially changing leadership to add diversity to the team, created some incredibly strong leaders that really helped pull out of us something different that I really enjoyed.
mm,
Right? They took it a different direction, right? And some of that is the previous leadership had in fact got tired. Some of it was they looked at the problem very differently, right? They looked at the problem from the perspective of we have a job, we get paid. The KPI is tickets closed and the time to close tickets, right? It's a standard SLA crap. But the new leader changed how we went about that and really focused on the customer satisfaction aspect of the ticket action itself. And she used to say something that became one of my favorite things to say. I'm not trying to create, or she said, my goal in all of this is to create raving fans. I don't want people that like me. I want raving fans. And that's always kind of stuck with me. And I think that had it not been for the fact that they changed to someone who had a different perspective on the challenge, I think we would have been stuck doing it the same way.
Mm.
It's
Yeah,
also
my career almost went hourglass, right? Where I started for the first, let's say, 5 to 10 years in an incredibly diverse financial services setting, right? Where all walks of life were delivering value and services to all walks of life, right? Because the reality is, in a bank, as you can imagine, um, the customer segments cross the nation, right? Cross the nation and cross the the constituency as a whole. The population is our customer base. And then moving in from that into in many ways, a startup technology organization where three of us were making decisions for a customer base of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And it was very clear that this reduction of diversification of thought made poor decisions in many ways. It was only our experience that were added to the user experience or to the UI or just how this thing actually functioned. And until we expanded that organization to have a much more not just diversified team member, but actually an inclusionary process of ideas, did we actually start to mirror what the client set was again. So I've seen this whole what clearly did work, but I didn't appreciate it, to what clearly didn't work, and it was obvious, back to a point where I felt that this was a normal, rational way one designs an organization.
and I would say diversification really is, I kind of want to double click on it, really is diversification of thought,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not diversification of appearance. Let's be honest, right? When we see the term diversity hire, it refers to sex or race. Those are the things that it refers to. Those are outward appearance,
Yeah. It
right?
might be distinctly different between Canada and the U.S., but I buy that.
Right. So the challenge becomes, if all I've done is hire someone with the same perspective but a different outward appearance, I haven't really changed anything. I haven't really gained any value.
Right.
And I worked in organizations that were tremendously diverse of the races and sexes represented, and yet every single person thought the same. Their industry had changed around them, but they all thought about the industry kind of pre-change, and they
Right.
were completely unable to catch up with the evolution of the industry and really take advantage of the dynamics that were added and the opportunities that were created.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I worked at another company where the industry was very cloistered. Right, it was very nepotistic, and being one of the few people from outside that industry, um, I immediately showed my value simply by having a different perspective. It wasn't that I was better at it or worse or anything else than anybody else in the room. It was simply a different perspective added to a pond that had become stale that all of a sudden allowed us to start grabbing change and making differences.
Yeah, the least diverse organization is a family-run business.
For sure.
Because not only do you not get diversity of thought, you have a patriarch or a matriarch making effectively all the decisions. So there's no.
So there's a really famous organization that's got that problem right now. You've been in the news a lot. Why can't I think? Oh, White House. Right.
Yes. Not by design, but certainly by implementation.
Sure.
But
So
I've encountered many small, medium, large, family-based organizations where it's very clear that um, they're making hereditary conversations, or they're setting themselves up for financial gain for the next several hundred years. Right? It's about inheritance sharing versus actually providing value, to a client mix or to an audience.
but you don't have to pick between the two,
Yeah.
right? Like ultimately, you could in fact do both.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth of the situation is, if your um, son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter, niece, nephew, cousin, brother, whatever the family member is that's involved, is in the wrong position, it doesn't actually have to change the share they own in the company.
Right.
It is totally fine to take someone that needs to inherit because that's the way you want it to go and put them on the board and still give them an inheritance.
Right.
It's okay to put them in the spot that makes logical sense for them, even if they have the golden list of golden parachutes, because putting the right people in the right positions can be a multiplier of value,
Which is
right?
why those organizations do well when it's a family-run business, but an external CEO.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk inclusion. We talked about diversity a lot. Let's talk about inclusion. So diversity is diversity of thought, both a thought in terms of how one thinks and then experience holistically, right? So I have different expertise and experience, and you want to add that to your team. But inclusion is about ensuring that you're constantly getting that feedback, that there isn't somebody in the room that's in the corner that you never talk to or ask for their input, that everybody gets to provide input all the time. You're constantly including these voices. How do I how do I ensure that culture is created?
So I actually like Zoom for this,
Mm,
and for those who don't like do this naturally because you've been doing it long enough that you've come up with your own methods, here's a great method. Simply do a round robin in Zoom.
mm,
Ask for opinions and make it active, and just go from where you're at to the next person, 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 right? Until you've gone through everyone. And then when you do it the next time, do the same exact thing, only go backwards. Start from where you ended last time and go back through. Oftentimes what happens is people share opinions. They work together, right?
mhm,
It's not bizarre that they're going to share opinions. They may not even have much to say on that particular topic. They don't want to be first or last because those are the voices that are the hardest.
right.
So simply pick an order to go, and then when you're back in person, do the same thing. Just go around the conference room, right? And then go the other direction. And don't demand that everyone speak. Just ask that everyone voice an opinion, even if it's simply that they concur with someone else. That's totally fine. Not everyone's going to want to speak the same. Not everyone's going to say the same number of words. Not everyone's going to have the same voice, and not everyone's going to have a perspective on everything said. But do make sure you're collecting it. And then you're going to find that there will be some people that are simply that you interpret as being a naysayer. They're simply against everything that's said. That's a really good opportunity for you to mentor them or to connect them with a team member who can mentor them in how
Mhm.
to be appropriate, and how to be respectful, and how to determine the difference between gathering opinions before a decision is made and executing on a decision once it's already been made.
Mm. I like that. I have a slight augmentation, and you probably agree with it, but I'll say it anyway. Is that there's generally still someone in the room that's either accountable or responsible for that particular topic or that particular decision. Ensure that person speaks last, not first. Right? You don't want the point of view in the room before everybody gets an opinion of that point of view. You want all the point of views first. And then you expect that person who's responsible to assimilate everything they just heard. In fact, you've got to be very specific to say, I don't even want to hear your opinion yet until you've effectively repeated some of the interesting ideas you've just heard in the last 10 minutes before you actually augment your opinion to incorporate those concerns.
That's the best advice of it all, for sure. For sure. The person who has the authority and the responsibility goes last, and the requirement should be, in fact, that they comment on the opinions in the room.
Right?
It shows that they're being heard and that they're being considered. It
And
does not mean
they're
they get
listening.
done. It
Yeah.
just means they're heard and they're considered.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's a good idea, but we're not. I don't know that that's appropriate in this case. That's a totally fine response,
Right.
as long as that's not your only response, because then it gets to be blamed.
Right. And then you're guaranteed to have opinion that's not an expert opinion. It's just based on what I've heard and seen and read and know outside. This is what I think is true. Here's a point of view that you probably didn't expect to hear.
Right.
Great. And that's true as the leader too. Leader can't go in the room with a decision or an opinion or a point of view unless that decision's already done. We don't get to change it as a team. This decision has now come down, and I'm now communicating it to you. Different situation. But if
Correct.
you are empowered to make this decision, leader can't start. or you've just asked everybody to say yes. That's the only net result of that conversation.
The opposite is true when the opposite is true, right? When this is we're discussing to make a decision, the leader goes last.
Right.
When it's the other way around, a decision has been made and now it's about us executing, the leader must go first.
Right.
Don't start collecting opinions if the decision is already made, because the opinions don't have value at that point.
Right.
Right. And it starts to become a really good cultural way to set up the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't go first, then everyone in the room knows we're now open for opinions. Now is the time for your thoughts, for your desires, for your interests, and your concerns to be heard, to be counted and tallied and weighed. And then the opposite is true when the opposite is true. When the leader speaks first, we culturally know a decision has been made. Now we're in execute mode. Now we figure out how do we take that decision, and regardless of the any issues we have with the decision itself, how do we ensure we mitigate the risk that we saw before the decision was made in how we execute?
So that's the easier of the two. So it's easy-ish in a room to have those discussions. But how do you include top to down within the organization? Let's say there's 4 levels between the the application developer and the CIO. How can you include diversity of thought or inclusion of conversation in a much bigger team? How can you make sure opinions from everywhere in the organization get boiled up to somebody who ultimately needs to make that decision? It seems like a harder problem.
It's a much harder problem.
Yeah.
It's a significantly harder problem. And it does not work by putting everyone in a room, because
No.
it just becomes noise, right?
That'll be a big town hall.
Right. And so really what you need is this is where clearly defining stakeholders becomes important, right? If 4 teams are involved in making a decision, then there should be 4 stakeholders, at least one from each team, who's responsible for gathering the input from their team on an ongoing basis and bringing it to the stakeholder meeting where they share their concerns, their execution plans, whatever it happens to be. So they ensure that their whole team is represented. And that does fall on leadership to really determine who represents the team in those stakeholder meetings. And I have to be honest, shouldn't always be the leader.
Right.
Probably, maybe should never be the leader, depending on your organization.
Right.
Because ultimately they need to be in the room. Also, as a culture, you probably need to have some rules built around it. Because if it's just if it's 3 VPs in the room and then the 4th is an application developer, there's going to be a voice that's not as well heard.
Right.
Right. So don't set yourself up for failure. Really have a design methodology in doing it and thinking about it from an organizational standpoint, right? If you're the CIO, start defining what those rules look like. Start defining your expectations. Do you really want your VPs to be representative of all of the stakeholders that roll up underneath them? Or is there a better stakeholder that might be closer to the problem that can better articulate either the solution or the usability of that solution than the VP? That's probably a better stakeholder. In which case, you need to encourage the culture so that that person's voice is always heard. Even if that means in those meetings, you ensure that their voice is not drowned out.
Yep, I agree. All too often is there multi-level committees, which simply don't work. Because a multi-level committee will immediately, just general culture, will start to be listeners for the lower part of the organization and deciders for the higher part of the organization, which isn't, in fact, what you want as the CIO. You need to design those committees to have as many peers as physically possible so that nobody in the room has any particular authority over anyone else. However, they have a set of accountabilities and responsibilities that are obvious to everybody, right? Have a developer, have a BA, have a QA, create an agile team that obvious everybody has a role and nobody's running the team versus 3 VPs and 5 individual contributors. Those 3 VPs will make every single decision in the room, which is absolutely not effective because it's quite unlikely those VPs have enough detailed knowledge to make those decisions.
Yeah. And I would say that if you as the CIO or you as whatever the leader is in the room, the ultimate person that the decision is being presented for, if you are not in the room some of the time, then you make sure the person with the lowest title presents the notes from the previous meeting.
Right.
They're much more likely to stumble over the things that their opinion didn't get heard on
Right.
versus a VP pushing forward the decisions made by the VP.
Right.
Right. So I think there's some easy ways to do that that often get missed.
Yeah. So other things like bits and bytes, you need to look for people who have a different opinion than yourself, right? So don't always bring in people in the committee who you think already have the same opinion. Make sure there's diversity of thought in that general room. Like there's always somebody who distinctly has a different architectural design. Put them in that room because that will be an interesting behavior to see. Don't seek out same decisions always. Sorry, don't seek out same expertise. Seek out alternative expertise, and potentially even create a distinctly different communication path up to the CIO. It doesn't always have to be through the hierarchy. It can be different paths of communication, informal or even formal. But you've got to create multiple paths. And the reality is, still need an open door policy, right? If somebody wants to come in and have a conversation with you, let that conversation occur.
Don't just let it encourage it, right?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
actively encourage the fact that an open door policy means I do in fact, like if my door is open, the expectation is anyone can walk in and have a conversation about anything. No filters, no language. You say what's on your mind, and I
Yeah.
will listen to the absolute best of my ability for the length of time until I have to close the door because I've got another meeting.
Right.
Right. An open door policy needs to actually be an open door policy. Entirely too often, it's not really an open door policy.
Right.
Um, in which case, you kind of as a leader, you kind of end up just hearing one voice, right? And you never actually get a full understanding of what's really happening.
Yep. Carlos, that was a broad and detailed conversation.
Well, I wanted to give a tip before
Okay.
we stop, and that's a tip on how to execute on the very thing that you brought up. Right? How do I know someone's going to give me a different perspective when I'm hiring them, when I'm interviewing them? And a really easy way to do that is pick a meeting that didn't have a lot of diversity in it to get to a decision. Give them the decision, and then ask if they would do it differently.
Mm.
Right? Allow them to challenge the thinking on that decision. If they go, "Oh, that sounds good," you probably aren't going to get the diversity of thought.
Right.
But if they start firing things like, "Hey, did you think about this because of? Did you think about X because of Y? Did you think about W because of V?" You're probably going to end up with someone that's going to give you a different perspective because you wouldn't have heard it in the meeting prior. Be
Right.
very, very easy to do and kind of a simple way to phrase a question and can be very timely for what you're doing.
That's the perfect tip. Yep. Excellent.
Perfect. And so there you have it, my friends. Make sure that when you're hiring someone or when you're building a team, it's not just diversity, like Paul and Howard mentioned, just the way it looks, but also you want what is in here. So they will help you to lead that team to make the transformation that you need in your company and in your community. My friends, as every week, make sure that you click on the bell and subscribe, share with others, and we'll see you on our next episode.